Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. So what a better way to travel through Italy than doing by ingredients? And today's guest is the author, Viola Buitoni, who is not only a cookbook author, but she's really someone that is going to give you so much information on the history of some of the ingredients that might be commonly seen in her pantry. She will tell us also how she got to this journey into the Italian cuisine by ingredient. But first, pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Applying for Italian citizenship? Need documents translation? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translations and assistance services. Be sure to visit us at istitutomondoitaliano.org and schedule your free consultation. Well, the wait is over, and today we're going to have a delightful and rich conversation with someone that I had been following and admiring for quite some time, and I'm so happy, fellow Roman as well, that Viola has taken time from her busy schedule to join us to tell us about not only her book, but her love for food. Benvenuta, Viola. Welcome to the program.
Grazie, Viviana. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you. And thank you for supporting my work.
So Viola, I always like to start from the beginning. The beginning, a lot of people might associate the last name with a traditional household name that has, you indicated right off the book, I believe you are the 6th generation of Buitoni, and but you're not just a Buitoni, and that's what I want to focus on.
Well, it's good.
It's a wonderful legacy.
Yes, yes. It's good I'm not just a Buitoni because, as you know, the company has been sold for quite some time now. So I'm happy that I had more tricks up my sleeve than just just my last name. So that was good. But yes, I am the 6th generation.
It might be essere una figlia d'arte, in this case, carrying that big legacy. But maybe it was in your DNA, the appreciation for food traditions. And this is where I would like to start.
Yes.
Take me back to your childhood and you were between Rome and Umbria. I think Umbria had a very...
I was born in Rome. My mother's family is from Rome. So I was born in Rome. Myself and all of my 4 siblings were born in Rome. But we actually grew up outside of Perugia, going towards the Lago Trasimeno, which is kind of, I would say, slightly northeast of Perugia. And so that's where I grew up in what used to be a very small town, and it's now essentially become almost like a suburb of the city. I spent all of my childhood there until I came to the States. So my parents, in addition to, of course, the family business, my parents really loved food deeply, not just what came out of the factory, but they also really loved food, and they believed that the best food that you could have was the one that you raised yourself. So we had a large house. I mean, we were 5 kids, so that was a given. So we had a large house. It was in the country, and there was a chicken coop, and there was an olive grove, a vegetable garden, vegetable and flowers, I should say, because my mother was just in love with flowers. And there were constant experiments. So, for example, there would be like, oh, let's see how we can raise bunnies. Or we also had a pig pen. And for several years growing up, there were pigs being fed and raised for the winter slaughter. So so I grew up eating all that. That was kind of always part of my background. And I don't really have any conscious memory without many of the ingredients that I describe in the book.
Mhm.
So there was also, because we were still really kind of out in the countryside, there was also a shepherd down the street that made ricotta and sheep's milk. And there was a dairy, and there was the I guess you call it the dairy maid, a milkmaid, which came by every evening and would say, how many liters would you like? And you went with your little bolli latte and say, I want 1 liter, 2 liters, and so on and so forth. So that magic, which I realize now was magic, was part of my life, as I said, and I never questioned it until I moved to the States.
Yes, and I would assume that also your life, your pace went also with nature in that way, that
Yes,
there were
of
certain
course.
seasons for certain things, and
Yes.
so in
So
addition to the
never.
holidays, you might have had something
Exactly.
related
So
to.
there was always the beat, kind of like the beat of the food clock, of the season clock. So there were of course certain things that we expected, say like cherries in the spring and persimmons before winter, before Christmas. And in fact, if I think about it, I can still visualize the persimmon tree changing and us kind of following it to get to the point where all the leaves would come down and all you had was like these beautiful glowing orbs that were ripe for the picking. And so that, of course, the string beans at a certain time of the year, and the peas and the pears, and everything would tell us what was happening next, right? So it was really linked to life. To give you a great example, end of summer, we would go blackberry pickings because my mother loved to make jams. So we'd all go. She brought us all in a big car, us and friends and cousins, and you had like all these little feet running around picking blackberries for the jam. And I knew what that meant to me is that the school year was just around the corner. The summer was coming to a closing. My tan was like as deep as it was not going to be until the next summer. And I would be going back to school very soon.
So now, is this school at this point university that brought you to the States, or was it a family move to the United States?
No, it was, my parents parted ways in the very early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And my father, who had kind of stepped back from family business duties for a few years, re-engaged with the American section of Perugina, which was also part of the family conglomerate. So the family said, hey, we need to really get this going. Would you like to spend some time in the US and kind of just fix things? Because it had been there for a long time, but it had been a little bit neglected, let's say. So my father came to the States and he took the reins of Perugina first, and then for a brief time also Buitoni. And he ended up spending all of the 80s here, which were a pivotal year for me, decade for me, because that's when I finished high school. So 85 came, high school was done. And my father said, hey, would you be interested in coming out and see if you like it here? So I said, all right, well, let's see. And I started reading. I have been actually passionate about American literature for a long time. I am a huge fan of Philip Roth, for example, and John Updike, and many of the more contemporary women writers. But then I also started reading things like university catalogs, right? College catalogs. And I said, this actually is kind of interesting. And so I said, all right, well, I'll try. So I did. And I enrolled in NYU and I studied there. And in the meantime, my father's American time was coming to an end because there was one more passage of ownership to Nestle's from the person who had bought it from us. So he stayed one more year with Nestle's and then he was coming back. And in the meantime, I had started working what was supposed to be I would say a summer job while I was trying to figure out what to do after college. And it turned out that the job was in a restaurant, I should say. It was in a restaurant kitchen. A friend of a friend who was opening this beautiful restaurant in Chelsea. And I think within a month, I knew that this is where I was being called. I was like, this is amazing. I actually love this. I love the activity. I love the people. I love the rhythm. I had a chef who was very much into the way that I was raised. So you would not see a tomato in the winter, for example. It was very much about both seasonal and regional Italian cooking. So, but also some reinterpretation. So the tenets, the fundamentals of Italian cooking, but also brought in a situation that was not the Italian countryside. It was New York City in the 80s. So he was able to source beautiful things. We work with the New York Union Square Garden. So my idea of food started opening up even more. And I started seeing so many things and so many ingredients. And I started a journey that then became my professional journey.
When the impact, when you first came, was it indeed that everything was available to you, or that search
No, not
for
really.
ingredients is kind of little treasure hunt, right?
Exactly. So it became a treasure hunt, right? So I came here and I stepped off the plane. I like to say that I stepped off the plane and I felt like, all right, no one's going to take me away from this city because, 19, New York, right? Do I need to say more? It was like, plus New York in the 80s was, if any of your listeners know about it and remember it, but it was just absolutely just a ferment of fun and delight. And so, here's little me coming from Perugia, which is a beautiful, but not, compared to New York, is really kind of a super sleepy town. And so I loved it right away. And then initially I was all excited by the super fluffy pancake stacks and whatnot. But then I realized, yes, that's fun, but it's not where I want to be. To me, the food part was intrinsic. It was not something I could do without. So I started looking, right? I started looking for things. I was like, all right, well, I need some good olive oil and I need first the basics, and then more and more. So it kind of became like a blood sport, right? Where my friends would go to the Hamptons for the weekends or to ski, or I would be like, no, I'm going up to Little Italy in Arthur Avenue. I have to go up to the Bronx, or I have to go to, to the Italian sections in Brooklyn, and I would go like all over town, all over Manhattan, also hunting for like the tiny delis, because there were the big places, there was Little Italy, of course, there was Balducci's on 6th Avenue. But then there were lots of little hidden gems all over town. And that's what I would do. I would just like start scouting for those. Plus, of course, the farmers markets, right?
Yes.
Because the Union Square farmers market was amazing.
And what was the reaction of your friends? Did I think that you were going a little bit out of, or over time you were able to get them on your side and then the difference is like, this is what something tastes here. If you spend a little more, or if you source it from the producers, the experience elevates to the nth power. So I was wondering if there was anyone around you that fell into this little convincing, this quality convincing.
So especially for the eating part, it was not that difficult, right? Because first of all, I had a lot of Italian friends because New York University even then was very much an international community. So there were many Italians, but also my non-Italian friends, be them from North American, or from other parts of the world, really did not need a lot of convincing when it came to eating a good meal. Plus, I lived with my dad on the Upper East Side. We had like a really nice apartment. So they were more than happy to leave their cramped dormitories and come up and have a nice dinner. So there was that. But also, yes, there were definitely a few friends who engaged in this search. And then there were also the friends who may not engage all the time, but they wanted to know when the time came. So I kind of became the go-to person. So if you needed something that had to do with food, you called Viola and she would tell you, oh, that's where you can find it.
And I think you were also able to source certain types of food. And I think this is going to come out also when we talk about a book, and not necessarily in Italian only stores, because there are some other cultures, like some other Mediterranean cultures that might have similar ingredients, so that you might have found satisfying your needs. But we'll keep also some of those places that you do mention in the book. as we touch some of these ingredients. So then and you had also a catering business when you were still in New York. And
I
then
did.
now you're connecting from San Francisco, so some live events. We're like so fast forwarding.
So
I managed to get you out of New York and get you all the way to San Francisco.
so yes, I had a catering business. I had about 6 years of kind of honing my chops in both back and front of the house, I should say. In which included, by the way, which is not mentioned in the book, but it is most people look at me and when I say that they say, what? Included a year and a half in Hawaii, working at a 5-star hotel as a front of the house room service manager. So that was a great school in terms of learning how to interact with people, how to interact with guests, because ultimately when you cook professionally, you think of your customers as guests, right? So there was that. And then at some point, this Milanese woman who was a friend of a friend and I crossed paths, and we were both looking for the next step. She, because her kids had begun going to school, she was a little older than I am, and me, because I was like, I am done. If I have to work this much, I need to be working for myself and not for others. So we started catering, and initially it was a home-based business. Eventually, the home-based business became big enough that we looked to a place outside, and we opened a store on Madison and 78. So we had a store for about a couple of years. And already at the end of the first year, we looked at each other and we said, this is not a lifestyle that we can possibly sustain. We were, it was 7 days a week. It was 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And then you got home and you still had things to do. And we thought maybe we had, in Italian, we say we had taken a step that was longer than our leg. So within a year, we kind of decided, okay, we need to scale this back. And in the meantime, what had happened is that I had started dating a man who's now my husband. And he was lovely and delightful. And it was really kind of a beautiful, amazing connection, except that he lived in San Francisco and I was still in New York. So we kept, the way I like to say it is we kept breaking up, but that didn't work. So I moved to San Francisco. We got married and had a baby instead. So,
and I don't know if it was along the way or also by being in San Francisco that your career also in educating people continued to flourish. Cooking demonstrations you have, and you deal a lot with Italian Cultural Center, San Francisco.
I do, yeah. So I took, I have to say, when I got to San Francisco, I mean, initially was supposed to be, okay, let's see how this goes, because, it was like after a breakup period, we were like, okay, this is crazy, right? Because we keep like circling back to each other. So I had a super quiet summer because we had closed the shop, and I was, I was doing some freelance, but I was doing pretty high-end catering. So everybody to whom I was catering in New York in the summer goes away. They leave to Europe, they leave to the Hamptons. There's hardly any one of the people who were my core business. So my husband, John, said, why don't you come and spend a couple of months here with me in San Francisco, and let's see how it goes. And it went so well, I was pregnant within like a couple of weeks. So, but I got there, I think in mid-July maybe, and by, or maybe early July. And then by my birthday, August 5, I had a positive pregnancy test. So I was like, well, this went pretty well. And so I stayed, and John and I got married. And, the first few years, I kind of took a step back because at this point I was already well into my 30s. And I felt that I was going to have this child and I might have others, but it wasn't a given because of my age. So I said, all right, let me spend some time. Let me focus on this. Let me enjoy this maternity journey that I've been craving for such a long time. So I spent probably the first 3-4 years very engaged with my kid. Also, I was having some family. Both my parents at that point were unfortunately dealing with long illnesses that led to their death. So I was going quite a lot back and forth between Italy and San Francisco. In fact, my kid's first language is Italian. He learned Italian before he learned English. So and then at some point I realized that we needed to to say, okay, we're either here or there. We can't be in both places. And Ernesto, my child, started going to preschool first. And at this point, I had a lot more free time. And I said, okay, what am I going to do next? And I tried re-engaging in catering and restaurant. But honestly, Viviana, pretty soon I realized this is not for me. You know, I don't want to be out every evening. There's not enough money
It's a
I could make.
lifestyle
Yeah,
that
yeah.
requires major
Right.
sacrifices.
Yeah, you know, missing a Christmas of your like 4 or 5 year old kid is worth no money, is good enough for that.
Yeah.
So so I had this idea that maybe teaching was up my was next. Mostly also because I had informally done it for such a long time, right? I had cooked alongside friends. I had been telling everybody where to get this and where to get that and how to choose it. So I turned to our Italian Cultural Institute here in San Francisco and to the consulate. And I said, look, you know, they were saying, okay, we need a bigger audience. They felt that the audience was not big enough to sustain the activities they were doing. I said, why don't we talk about food a little more? Because every time that we talk about food, we get a lot of people. So they said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't you propose something? So I proposed a what do you call it, a series of events that was based on education. And I wanted it to be both a theoretical and practical education. So in addition to talks, you know, we presented books, we talked about ingredients, we talked about traditions, and I also flanked it with some very small lessons, like cooking classes, and which at the time I was doing in the consulate kitchen in San Francisco. They were very tiny because this is not a big kitchen. It was essentially like a nice home kitchen. So just 6 people at a time around a square table. And we would meet around somewhere around 10 in the morning and then go on cooking until lunchtime and have lunch around, you know, kind of a lunch dinner, like a late lunch, early dinner. So we'd spend the better part of the day cooking, essentially. And it was delightful. I mean, it was just great. And this started gathering me a very faithful following. And also it caught the imagination of a reporter in our local newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, mostly because of the idea of the consulate, right? Because you know, it's the access part. You don't get to go to the consulate, the backside of the consulate, unless I take you there. So he wrote a beautiful article about my work, which was like a whole page in the style section. We're talking 2010, I think. Yeah, which came out, and that kind of propelled me to citywide attention. And from there, then I also started teaching at another school in San Francisco called 18 Reasons, which is a beautiful nonprofit community school, cooking school. And then eventually there was another school that opened about 6-7 years ago. And I'm also teaching Italian food there. And I've also taught at Italy in various cities. I have taught in other schools. I've done collaborations with other chefs. And then I also was doing some collaborations with the Italian trade agency, which would come to me and say, hey, we have a trade fair. We need someone talking about prosciutto di Parma or parmigiano. And so I would go and be their kind of like the spokesperson, present and taste to their potential buyers.
And also all this work earned you in 2020 the title Cavaliere dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia by the President of the Italian Republic for indeed for your work furthering the culture and business of Italian food.
Yes.
Now, that's
right. It was right in the midst of COVID, Viviana.
So now I'm living through your book, and I really love the approach, because again, we talked about the flavors that people associate with Italian cuisine, but not necessarily a regional book or anything. It just kind of you know, divided into different sections that I would like to for you to address. So the 5 sections in the book. The first one is about condiments. We'll be talking about the balsamic vinegar and capers. Then we have the cereals and the rice. And we had also Valentina, the rice sommelier, who mentioned also
Valentina.
your work. We'll talk about the dairy, some meat, and fish. And I think we should get into this because it's going to really open up the horizon of a lot of our listeners and viewers. And I have to share the first, you look so at peace, like you are such in your element in this picture that I just love, it gives that element of authenticity. I say, this is my world, this is my Italy. So
Yeah.
let's start with the first section. Tell us what we should all know about not only balsamic vinegar, but also the other ingredients that you talk about in this section.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say one thing about the book, that I love the fact that you caught its spirit and its nature, because I want your listeners to know that is really a book written for home cooks. So this is not what I like to call project cooking, right? Where you're like, okay, it's going to take me 3 days or a whole day. I very knowingly left out fresh pasta, gnocchi, anything that require leavening, because especially with the pandemic, because this book was part of this book came from the time where we were all locked in. I realized, I mean, I knew it before, but I realized that people really need this skill of cooking at home. Not everyone needs to be a master chef, but we all need to be able to put a nice meal together that is flavorful, that is good, that is also based on what is readily available. And that's this book, right? So my philosophy behind it is you build a pantry of really impactful flavors, and then you have your local food shed, whatever that might be, and you cross that local food shed with these super impactful flavors, and that's how you have easy cooking with great ingredients. So the book, as you said, is divided in 5 sections. The first one is what I call the condiments, condimenti. I struggle with these words because it's not, I was like, okay, what do we call this? And then I came up with condiments because of its Latin root. It is what you season with, what like you make sauces with. And the 3 elements that I brought in here are balsamic vinegar. And the second chapter is dedicated to conserved tomatoes, not fresh tomatoes, but tomatoes that go in a can, a jar, in a paste, in a bottle. And then the third one are olives and capers. And the next section is cereals, and then we have cheeses, and then salumi, and last but not least, fish. So let's start with the condiment. I love to talk about balsamic vinegar first when your listeners are still like, with their ears pricked and really listening. I like to say, before you fall asleep, I'm going to tell you about balsamic vinegar, because I would say that balsamic vinegar is the ingredient that needs the most disambiguation in the Italian pantry. Most people say, oh, it's like absolutely a must of the Italian pantry. And, the truth is that the vast majority of Italian pantries until maybe like 10, 15, 20 years ago didn't have any balsamic vinegar. Most people didn't even know what balsamic vinegar is. And I would argue that most people still don't know, right? So let's start with how was it born? A very brief history. So we're looking at the region of the eastern part of Emilia-Romagna. So the provinces of Modena and Reggio Emilia. Which were independent duchies at the time and ruled by some very wealthy families. And we hear talk of an exceptional vinegar coming out of this area of the world already back in the year 1000 and some. So there's been talk of this exceptional vinegar making area for quite a few centuries. And in the mid 1700s, it's the first time that we actually can document the word balsamic related to vinegar. And it was used to kind of set aside and set apart a production of the vinegar that was especially exquisite in the palace of some duke. So at this point, we have the 2 words that are associated. We're looking at 1746, if I'm not mistaken. And then they start going together. But for quite some time, they still remain, first of all, very relegated to the area, right? Because of course, Italy was all fractioned in small states and countries and duchies and whatnot. And also they really kind of remained in the attics of the noble and rich families. Yeah. So they were still for the consumption, production, and use of the wealthy. But little by little, we have a middle class that is grown and becomes richer. So they also start having the money to make these products. And also what is happening is that these are becoming really kind of a sign of wealth, and they start becoming passed down from family to family. So for example, there's a woman gets married, a rich woman gets married, part of her dowry is a battery of balsamic vinegar. A child is born, especially a woman, a girl is born, and she gets her own balsamic vinegar battery. That is still the case today, by the way, right? So the kids, when they're born, they get their own balsamic vinegar thing, but it's both for girls and boys nowadays.
Hey, wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
So then, move forward to the 20th century, mid 20th century, we have World War II. And then after World War II, towards sometime in the 50s, Italy experiences a big economic boom, right? It's the post-war economic boom. And so a lot of these things that are status symbols, so to say, right? If you could get this, it's because you had money, start becoming coveted by everyone. And so what happens, there is someone who says, oh, look, everybody wants balsamic vinegar, but no one really knows what it is. So let's just make something that approximates it because, whatever, nobody really knows what the real thing is supposed to taste like. And here starts the slow spread of balsamic vinegars throughout Italy first. And, you're looking the first time I tried balsamic vinegar was with my parents we were in Bologna, and they left us alone at a restaurant, and there was this waiter who like dropped this thing that looked like silk. I'm like, what is that on our tortellini? And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I think it was my sister and I, we were 6 and 8, one of my sisters, and this was back at the time where leaving your kids alone in the care of waiters at restaurants was absolutely normal. Don't misunderstand me. It's not anymore, but back then it was fine. You would you would get like a stranger on a train and put your kids in and said, oh, can you make sure it gets off at this station?
Yeah.
Like that. This does not happen anymore. But yeah, they used to be that way. And, many of us survived. So, so yeah, that was how I first met balsamic vinegar. And then my parents, of course, loved it because my parents loved both the food that we made, but also they loved all kind of different foods. And so then, I would say probably by the 70s, it started really getting outside of its area of production. And then by the 80s, early 90s, that start coming to America. At some point during this journey, the people who had been making balsamic vinegar right for a long time said, hold on a second, there are like my family's well-being depends on this, and I put years and years into this, and then here comes some guy who like in 10 days produces something and they sell it as balsamic vinegar and completely undercut what I'm doing. So what is it that they do? This is the question, right? Why can you pay as much as like $300-400 for like 125 ml bottles versus like, the $5 you pay at Trader Joe's for something that's called balsamic vinegar? So what they do, the people who do it right, and I've been doing it for centuries, they take grapes, they crush them, and they have what you call the must, right? Which is the very first stage of even the wine fermentation. So you take the must and you cook it down up to a point where it's really reduced, I would say by about 30-40%, but it's still alive, so it can still change. And then through a series of kind of changes, mostly they start an acetic fermentation that reduces it even further. And then they start what they call a battery, which is a series of at least 5 barrels that are decreasing in size. And at the first go, they fill them all, and then they leave them open with just a little piece of cloth that opens it so that no extraneous body gets into it. And they kind of let it do its thing in an attic, where it benefits from weather patterns, from light, from winds. There are usually windows on both sides, so that they get a certain kind of wind going from one side to the next. And then once a year, they go back and then they do what they call pouring and topping, travaso e rincalzo. So they start from the smallest one and they refill it with the one after that, and so on and so forth. And then the biggest cask in the battery is filled from the new batch of the cooked grape must. And this, you may have noticed that I mentioned nothing but cooked grape must. That is the one ingredient that goes into vinegar that is transformed through years, and nothing else can go into it. And so these years need to be at least 12. So you cannot call a balsamic vinegar traditional unless it's 12 years old at least. So this word that I just mentioned, traditional, is key. So the two words, balsamic and vinegar, you can apply them to many different things, right? There's lots of things that are vinegar. You can make vinegar from fruit. You can make vinegar from apples, from grains, from lots of different things. Balsamic, same thing. I mean, you can call a cough syrup balsamic. In Italy, as you know, balsamo is the word for conditioner. My kids' hair shampoo is a balsamic shampoo. So, so what does that mean? Really nothing. The two words separately, together, they start having a better, more deeper meaning. But the European Union a few years ago ruled that no one could own these two words separately or together. But what they did say is that you can take these two words and you can connect other things to it, and then you can have something that can be protected. What are the other terms that we can connect to them? Are origin, so where does it come from, and process, so how it's made. So the word traditional is the process word, right? So it tells you that this is made in a traditional way, which is regulated by a consortium, by the European Union. And then the other one is the origin. It can only come from Modena or from Reggio Emilia. So it has to have these words: traditional balsamic vinegar from Modena or traditional balsamic vinegar from Reggio Emilia. The other thing that it needs, and I'm going to show you, is a seal of quality from the European Union, which designates as a PDO product. So production of designated origins, and it looks like this. I'm sure you've seen it, I know.
Indeed.
So it's kind of like a gold and red star that gives you a certain peace of mind to know that that's done by someone who knows what they're doing. So once this thing is ready, 12 years have gone by. Now there's an outside body that needs to say this actually can be called traditional balsamic vinegar. And the outside body does not know who the producer is. This is to avoid any kind of favoritism.
Fair.
So they tried and they said, yes, this cuts the mustard, you can bottle it, but it's not the producer who bottles it. It's also, again, an outside organization that bottles it, has to make sure that there are no interference, right? Because the producer might say, okay, great, you've done it now. I'm going to put it in a bottle and add other stuff that make this cheaper. Once they're all bottled and sealed, at this point, then the producer can affix their own stamps. The bottles all look the same, which I will show you what they are.
Probably the ones with little belly.
Yeah, the little puff flask bellies. They're even on the cover, but this is the one that I have now. Yes. And this is the puff flask belly is for the Modena one. The Reggio Emilia one looks like a tulip skirt, like an upside down tulip.
Yes. And also the kegs, so to speak, le botti, they have to be of specific
specific
wood. You can't just use any woods. You can.
No, you can't. You cannot use any wood, and also you cannot use any grape. You can only use about 5-6 types of grapes that are from the area, but also have to be grown in the area. Because if you take, Lambrusco grape, you can grow Lambrusco anywhere. You can grow it in France, you can grow it in Sicily, in Umbria, wherever. But they are not allowed to use grapes that are not grown within a very specific area. So many, the better ones that I have tried, I mean, it's always a really good product, but I find that the ones that really are amazing and completely worth the money are the ones of producers who go vine to bottle, right? Which means they have their own vineyards, because that way they can really control the production. They can decide when it's time to pick the grapes, which is usually after the wine harvest, because they need more sugar. So they leave the grape on the vine longer because they want the sugar to develop. So they can decide, okay, now it's time, instead of just going to someone and letting someone else make that decision for them. So they really can control as much as possible all the stages of production. And so this one that I showed you is from an acetaia that I love called Cadalnon, which is in Vignola in the province of Modena. It's a
Yes.
brother and sister team, and they are just such production. They have their own vineyards, and then they bring it all the way to the traditional balsamic vinegar. And they actually just certify their vineyards as organic. It was a very long process, but they are just getting the certification for the last vineyard. So
and that is indeed visiting Acetaia is definitely an experience worth doing, and
absolutely.
going through also the different kind of vinegar tasting, so to speak, because even, you know, we'll talk about a couple of your recipes here where we might think about balsamic vinegar more as a dressing, but not for you. Because
So,
you make a cocktail, you make a dessert with it. So, and also there is the reduction that makes it really something delicious.
So let's talk about reducing vinegar, right? Because this balsamic vinegar, so this has been around for, this is the DOP. So this is like a 12-year-old bottle, right? Probably more by now, but you know, it's designated as a 12-year-old. So the 12-year-old is one designation, and then the next one is what we call the extra vecchio, which needs to be at least 25 years old, and that's for the Modena. The Reggio Emilia actually has one in between. They go by color. They do silver, lobster, and gold. And so the silver is 12, the lobster is at least 18, and then the gold is 25. So if I take this, I'm going to show you something. I'm opening this, and look at how long it takes for it to come down.
Yep, it's very...
There you go. So,
and it's usually just one drop worth to fill your entire mouth. I mean, yesterday
it goes all the way back here.
Yesterday when I was just making a basic reduction from one of your recipes, first of all, you know, you can see how liquid the vinegar is, and then once you reduce it, you can see also how it stays onto the
so
and I could not just stop. Like once I got to the point that I needed, and then I went back to it. I was, before watching a little bit on TV, I was like, I can just eat it as if it were Nutella. You know what I mean? A completely different flavor, but it is so powerful, so delightful.
And you can put, you know, you can put it in a, like I do cocktails, but sometimes I just put it in water. You know, you just put it like in sparkling water. It's delicious. So what I was saying is that this is, you know, this one is not something, you don't want to reduce this any further, right? Because it's going to get burnt essentially. But there is another type of vinegar, which is called balsamic, aceto balsamico di Modena, so balsamic vinegar from Modena. So we're bringing in not the process, but the provenance, which is kind of a product which is more modern and has positioned itself between the offer and the demand, so to say, right? There's a lot of demand for balsamic vinegar, not a lot of traditional balsamic vinegar, and also traditional balsamic vinegar is expensive and it's not for every pocket. So a group of producers kind of put their heads together and said, okay, how do we meet this demand? You know, this is kind of, it feels like an untapped opportunity. So they developed a product which is positioned itself somewhere between a super sharp red wine vinegar and the kind of rotund and beautiful sweet roundness of the traditional balsamic. And it's made with a part of very aged balsamic and a part of red wine vinegar. And then you can add in other things, including some caramel, to hasten the formation of both color and viscosity. So the latitude is a little wider here in terms of where you can get your products and where you can and how you can, the percentages of the different components, which means you get a much less expensive product. And this is what we call the aceto balsamico di Modena, right? It's not traditional here, but you still need to have the provenance. And what you have is the blue seal, which looks just like the red seal, but it is blue instead of red. So here are like the two seals. So that is the vinegar, this one, the traditional balsamic, sorry, the aceto balsamico from Modena, no traditional, take that off. That you can use more for like a salad dressing or for a reduction. That is not just a dressing, but it's also a cooking ingredient. This one, the traditional, is something that you put in a cocktail, that you put over cheese, that you put on vegetables. but you don't really put heat to it because you take away this incredible nature that has been developed over like years and years and years. So I suggest to people always like have both in your pantry because they have different functions. And also not only have both in your pantry, but also in terms of how do you buy a non-traditional balsamic vinegar, just a balsamic vinegar from Modena. Well, you know, this is a situation where price really is going to tell you what you're getting, right? Because obviously, the higher the percentage of non-aged vinegar elements, the less expensive it's going to be. So you can get a balsamic vinegar with a gold seal that's like $7, $8, $9, but you can also get one all the way up of something that can be like $40, $50. Obviously, the one that's $40, $50 is going to give you a much better product. I usually tell people just stay somewhere in the middle, right? Just go around, you know, maybe 15, something like that. That's going to give you a product that is good, that is reliable, so to say, in the way that it's made. It is controlled as an organism that says, yes, this is a reliable producer that uses good practices. And what we mean by good practices is also, you know, don't forget, there's also the human factor, right? They don't use underpaid labor. They adhere to all the practices of production, which include the way that you treat the people who work for you, which is important, right? Because ultimately love and just being a good person ends up going in what you do, right? What you make, especially when it comes to food. So that's the important part. So that's the story of balsamic vinegar. And it's very fascinating to me how just misunderstood this product has been.
I have a question regarding the recipe that you have, which is crema cotta.
Yes.
So is this a childhood favorite, or is it something that you develop over time? Because anything that's like, it reminds me of crema cotta, flan, creme caramel, it brings me back to my childhood. So I was curious to see if there was some memories associated with
so definitely a childhood flavor, meaning that you know that kind of the creme caramel. You know, creme caramel was the thing that you had when you went to a restaurant, right? You know, your mother wasn't going to make creme caramel. Like my mother never bothered with things that needed too much technique. So creme caramel was really a restaurant thing. But I had a nanny who made something we call latte alla portoghese, which is like a cooked milk type of thing that I loved. So this thing is a super quick reconstruction of that. So how did it come about? I think it came up, actually, I think it was born during the pandemic because it was kind of like a cheat on pastry cream. And during the pandemic, I was making this like kind of, I called it Stay Home and Cook Italian. And my husband and I, a few times a week, would do like these silly videos of me making like super quick things. And this was one of them because this takes no time, right? So you put it together in like what, 5 minutes?
5 minutes, and the oven does the job.
And then the oven does the job. And so I initially was just the cream. There was nothing on it. It was just the cream. And then I started playing, like I put jam under it. And then I started putting like little pieces of chocolate and then nuts. And then eventually one day I was like, oh, let me try with balsamic vinegar. And it kind of worked. So I just put the balsamic vinegar. I love that. That contrast between just this like roundness of the vinegar with its sharpness, right? Because it has acidity, but it's not like a super sharp acidity. It's like a very lovely and round acidity with the sweetness of the cream, because this is just cream, sugar, and egg, right? That's it. You don't have anything else. In fact, I have some of my friends and followers who make it with milk to keep it a little lighter. So you can also make it with milk. Obviously, with cream, it's got a much nicer mouthfeel, but you can also substitute the cream for milk.
Okay, so that's what I think.
You made it. Yeah.
This is my attempt. You know what was the most difficult part of it? Not to eat them all before we got to this talk. So basically, if you would allow me, this, I think it's a recipe that many people would appreciate. If you allow me to share, usually on Fridays, I do my little cooking videos, and it will be, I think, a nice experiment. So
absolutely, it would be my honor.
I'm definitely not in my kitchen right now, but the one thing is that you go around and you loosen up the
edges.
And let's see, and then the flip. that's where Viola will tell you, don't be shy, don't be afraid, because the cream is gonna feel it.
Yeah, food is like dogs, you know, they know when
So
you're
let's see.
afraid.
Let's see what we're going to get here. And so here we are, voila. Even though you say it's not a pretty dessert, because, you know, obviously it's cream, so it will move around. It is the most delicious thing that I have tasted in so long.
Thank
And
you.
as I said, good. And my husband is traveling this week. He's not gonna get more for me.
Well,
Probably
they
because
will.
I'm the one always offering the last one. Now the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one will be all for me.
They're very easy to make on the plus side, so you could surprise your husband when he comes back.
Yes, absolutely. So while I'm probably muting myself for a second, still in the same section, maybe we can spend a couple of minutes. I think capers are here because you also talk about the yes, capers. You talk also about the flavors of the capers, different type of capers. Can you educate us
Yes.
about capers?
So capers are a bush that is born, and you need a lot of sun, of direct sun for capers. And they are a beautiful bush that sprouts either out of walls. In Italy, you see all these like cascaded. They look like hair wigs almost. They're coming out of walls, of cracks in the walls. And also you find them on the ground and they kind of go up. You know, they're like a firework. They go up and then they come down and they kind of climb their way all around. So a caper starts with a little bud, which is a tiny, tiny bud that starts the process, and that is the caper itself. Obviously, it has different stages, right? You can get it when it's a tiny bud, and all the way up until it's much bigger and it's almost beginning to open into a flower. So those are all capers, but they have different denomination according to how big they are. They can start at like 2 millimeters and go all the way up to like 10 millimeters. The price also changes. So being the most expensive are the tiny ones, all the way to the ones that are bigger, that are the least expensive. So when I cook, like if I take the capers and I chop them and put them in a sauce, for example, I'm going to go for the less expensive ones. But if they're just on top, or if I'm not chopping them, then I will get the ones that are a little smaller. So I usually have like, 3 different kinds of capers, like 3 different calibers in my kitchen. I don't suggest everyone does that. I mean, you have to understand that I do this for a living. So I have, I have 10 types of flowers and 5 types of capers. But the thing that is interesting about capers in more recent time is that we have understood that, you can eat most parts of a plant. So this whole plant cooking and eating is just as expensive as important as whole animal eating. So when you take a plant, experiment with everything, which is what has been happening. So for example, caper leaves, right? In small islands, caper leaves have been part of the diet for a long time. People make salads with them. Generally, they need to get cooked down, otherwise they're quite leathery and a little bitter. But they can also be conserved. So foglie di cappero, conserved in oil, is now a fairly easy to find ingredient in Italy, and with some scouting in the States too. I love them on salad, but they are also sometimes can stand in for capers in a recipe. You can have them whole if you want, but you can also just cut them in very small threads. Also the what we call the germogli, so the sprouts, when there are like the tiny leaves and they start, and it's like the caper tips. Let's think of them as caper tips. And also chefs in Italy use the flowers, which are beautiful. When they become like these flowers, they're mostly white, but with some fuchsia layering, and they have like these things, like this feathering that comes in on top. You don't find those here just because obviously they don't travel very, very well, but the chefs are using them. And last but not least is what we call the caper berries. So after everything else is done, you are left with this like huge, very seedy thing that is reminding in flavor of a cornichon, like one of those little gherkins that you eat with the cold cuts. So yeah, so those are the different stages, and those are all the things that you can eat in a caper. And if you look for them, as I said, you can find the leaves, you can find the buds, you can find the different types of capers, and even the caper berries.
Wonderful. So before we move on to the next section, just one little message from our sponsor. Un caffè, per favore. My first cup of coffee sets the tone for my entire day, and I get my coffee at La Prima Espresso. La Prima has been brewing Pittsburgh Express coffee for nearly 35 years. Try any of their in-house roasted varieties of beans from all over the world at home, or come and enjoy an espresso or a cappuccino at any of their locations, where their friendly baristas and familiar faces will make you feel at home. Visit laprima.com to get La Prima Espresso coffee at your door. Okay, so in the second section, you talk about cereals. Here, it's a variety of different products that will encompass rice, farro, polenta. We did have a conversation about rice. We had a podcast all about rice, which is fascinating. But I also would like maybe to focus with you on farro, because there are many different varieties, and not everyone might be familiar with all the different types and so forth.
Yeah, I should, it's interesting because the cereal sections are the ones that took me the longest to write, the opening to them. Because, when it comes to kernels and grains, there is a science behind it, right? There are people tell you, no, this is it, this is that, and this is, this has got two things, and this has got one,
This
and
is not
this is
right.
whatever. So farro was especially difficult because here in the States, people say, oh, farro is emmer, farro is perro, is pelt, farro is einkorn, farro is this, and farro is that. And then people say, oh, no, but scientifically they're not related. Or so I did a lot of different of research, right? And so finally I landed, since I am talking to the consumer, I landed on the decision that what I wanted to tell consumer is not what science was saying or not saying, but what they were buying. So if we're looking at the commercialization of farro, there are three types of farro. There's a farro medio, farro, which is the medium farro, most common one. We're talking size. Then there's a farro piccolo, little farro, and then a farro grande, which is bigger, the biggest. So there's also farro monococcum and dicoccum, which is the monococcum is got only one kernel inside, and the dicoccum has more. And then there are different ways in which it is processed. So it can be whole kernel. It can be partially hulled. We call it pearled because it's not literally hulled, but it's kind of like buffed and shine like a pearl. And then there is semi-pearl, which is somewhere in between. So in terms of size, commercially, farro piccolo is einkorn. Farro medio is emmer, and farro grande is pelt, right? Now, some people will say, that's not right. They will go all up in arms. And though scientifically, that may be, not entirely 150,000% correct, I can tell you that commercially, that is what you get, right? So how do we use the different ones? First of all, we should talk about the one that's more common, and that's the medium size. So the farro medio, which is emmer, that is kind of, to me, that's the workhorse. So when you're getting something that says farro, 99% of the time, you are getting the emmer, the farro medio. Again, it can be whole kernel, it can be completely pearled, it can be semi-pearled. Semi-pearled is the one that I like the most. It has kind of like a reasonable amount of cooking time, but it is also keeps the bite very nicely. The farro perlato cooks very quickly. I mean, you can cook it in like 10 minutes, but you have to be super careful because it gets mushy if you don't keep your eyes on it. So the farro semi-perlato, the one that kind of keeps its bite nicely without having to cook 45 minutes, is what I use the most. And I use it, it's kind of like, it goes into soups, it goes into salads. You can do something that we call farrotto, which is a derivation of risotto. So treat it like a risotto. So that's my kind of go-to, but I also have all the other ones, right? And the farro piccolo only has one kernel inside. And then the big one, what is spelt and is commercialized as farro grande, can have like up to 3 or 4 different grains inside. You also recognize them because of the number of spikelets that they have going. One is like all like this, very orderly. The other one goes on all sides, and the third one is like super, just much wilder. The farro piccolo, which is the einkorn, is I think if I were to use it, for me, the best way to use it is a soup, because it's tiny and it's really kind of mixes well with everything that goes inside, and it definitely has a more intense flavor. So among the three, I would say that in terms of flavor, einkorn is the one where you get the really great flavor. In fact, if I can suggest one brand, and I'm going to go out of Italy here, but there is a grain maker in the States called Bluebirds, whose work I absolutely love, and they make a farro piccolo einkorn, which is sensational.
Out of this world.
Yeah, it's really so good. So then, you know, what can you do with it? You can also make flour. So if you have a flour, it's going to be a farro medio. You can make soups, you can make salads. You can also buy cracked farro. I have a soup with crab and cracked farro in the book, which I think it's great. And that is one of my, I like to look at it as a bow to both my origins and my place of living, because as you know, Dungeness crab is huge in San Francisco, but I grew up with farro, which is a super ancient grain, by the way. I mean, it predates wheat. We find it as far as like Etruscan times.
And so farro does have a little bit of gluten as well. So
yes, so it's not gluten free. Yes.
And then also there is a family story that put farro onto.
Oh my God, yes. Yes, that was a family story. So my brother was the oldest of the five of us, was the first one to get married. And it was a huge wedding. You know, it was the boy, it was the first one. So I think there were like 400 and some people.
Wow.
And because of like we decided not to assign tables, because we knew we would have created some strife. So we said, let's just not assign table, and let's like get everyone doing their own thing. That was not probably a good thing, because then everybody wanted to sit with everyone, and then there was no space, and it was kind of a messy affair. And it was super hot. It was like so hot, and we were like under this tent, and you know, it was acting like a steam chamber almost. So the person who catered it, this was done at my father's house out by the Lago Trasimeno. The person who catered it had this kind of like lukewarm, almost not chilled, but you know, very kind of thirst quenching farro soup that was made with artichokes. And the moment they set it down and people started eating, there was like a quiet and just a sense of unity, that all of a sudden we all liked each other. It doesn't matter where we were sitting. So it's always been like a big thing in my mind. And I always had farro my whole life. It was always, you know, I don't remember a time before farro, but that was the time where I was like, where it just kind of got fixed in my ingredients that I always had, because I associate farro to this kind of like this, oh, we can do this, you know? So yeah, so I love farro.
Can we pick your brain about the cheeses that you mentioned, the Parmigiano Reggiano Pecorino, mozzarella ricotta e burrata, just a little bit about the differences, processes, you know, maybe also the difference of some of the products. For instance, ricotta you might get here, it's a little grainy versus right off the the shepherd that is but you know, probably you get this question quite a bit about Parmigiano and Pecorino. They're interchangeable, what to do with one, what not to do, the aging process. So illuminate us.
So let's start with Parmigiano, right? Because that's like, who doesn't know Parmigiano? So first of all, Parmigiano is Parmigiano, right? We call it Parmigiano Reggiano. We don't call it Parmesan. We don't call it, you know, whatever, Reggiano. We just Reggianito or everything. It's, if you want the real thing, it's Parmigiano Reggiano. In fact, his name is protected. The same way where you cannot protect the balsamic vinegar thing, you can really protect the Parmigiano Reggiano. So Parmigiano is what we call a type of grana cheese, and that is a name that refers to the size of the grains when we cut it, right? When the curd gets cut into small pieces, you get this size that are like a grain, grana, right? And that's what gives Parmigiano that like nice crystallization, the crumbliness that we get in the mouth. Yeah. So Parmigiano is made with cow's milk. And it's made with milk that is fully fat. So there's no
the real thing. Yes.
thing. So full fat milk. And it is made with rennet. It's not vegetable rennet. So it's rennet that comes from a calf's stomach. And it is made with just these two elements. So the salt is brought in from the outside, meaning it sits in a salt solution. You don't rub it with salt, but you do sit it in a salt solution. And it ages, again, you're looking at around 12 to 16 months before it can even be called Parmigiano. It goes through the same thing as the aceto balsamico. There's an outside entity that comes in, and they test the wheels one by one. They test it. I mean, they used to test it with hammers, like little mallets. And also there is like a long thing, like a horse bone
Yeah,
that
also
goes
when
in.
I saw the prosciutto production, I
Exactly.
actually have one.
Yeah.
It's called
That goes,
but
that goes in and tells them where it is. Nowadays, honestly, they have amazing equipment. They have like these things that essentially give you an MRI of the Parmigiano. And they can tell you if there are things like irregularity inside, because sometimes you can see, like if there's like a bubble, something that's going wrong inside, you'll see like a big hump, but not always. Sometimes it looks perfectly fine, and then you go and you look at the inside and it's not so fine. So as I said, they do like the scanning of the Parmigiano, which is fascinating. I've seen it when I was in Italy a few years back, and it was just great. And so the Parmigiano that's not going well is taken out of the production. Unless it's gone really bad, it doesn't necessarily get thrown out. It just gets, it gets just ground and then just sold at a lower price, right? Because what it means is sometimes, as I said, there's something that is bad and dangerous, and then that goes away and it gets destroyed. But sometimes it just gets little defects that are not going to make it.
Imperfections,
Yes,
exactly.
imperfections. And so that's what happens to it. But a good Parmigiano will have aged for at least 12 months. Generally, I would say if it's less than 12 to 16 months is, not Parmigiano, first of all, but also I think you want to stay over 16 months. What do you do with it? So the younger the Parmigiano, the creamier it's going to be. So you're making something where you want the Parmigiano to really melt inside your dish, then stay with a younger Parmigiano. How do you know? You take it between your fingers. I mean, first of all, you look at it, right? It's clearer, like it's a little lighter. There's not going to be as much crystallization and crumbliness. You take it between your fingers, you go like this, and it kind of just becomes like a flat thing, right? So then the further up you go, and you will take this little piece of Parmigiano, you will go like this, and it will crumble rather than flattening. And it's going to look much more yellow, and it's going to have the crystallization and the crumbling sensation in your mouth. Usually, stay between 24 and 36 if you're using one Parmigiano for everything. When it gets to above 48 months, this is what we call a meditation cheese, which is not something you want to grate, not something you want to mix with other cheeses. You just have it with just the right pairing of wine, whichever you prefer. Can be red, can be white. It's like up to what you like. And you just sit there and you have it and you enjoy it. And maybe you listen to, NPR on the background, that drone that can put you to sleep. And you just meditate over it.
And maybe one little drop of that balsamic.
Or maybe one little drop. Yes.
Just
yes.
one little drop. So those flavors that once you want in your mouth, they elevate you to.
I have tasted Parmigiano that was 120 months. I have to tell you, it's like caramel. It gets really quite dark. And it's, not brown, but in a very yellow kind of way, right? Kind of like the caramelly yellow. And then it really really crumbles in your mouth. But if you keep it without chewing, little by little, it melts. It's really incredible. Yeah. So,
and then pecorino, on the other hand, the name of the cheese.
Pecorino comes from pecora, right?
Yeah.
Pecora is a sheep. So anytime you see pecorino, it means that it's a sheep that's made from sheep's milk. So it's a cheese that's made from sheep milk. And of course, there are 5 million different types of pecorino, right? There's yes. So there's also pecorino. They are regional. But they are also the making process is different. And then you have some that are young and creamy, some that are more aged, or something we call primo sale, which means first salt. And we are talking about pecorino romano, which is the one that we find the most. Interesting thing to know is that actually the majority of pecorino romano is produced not in the Rome area, but in Sardinia, which has the highest production of pecorino anywhere. In fact, most of the sheep producers that you find in central Italy, so Umbria, Toscana, Marche, Abruzzo, actually came from Sardinia. They were relocated from Sardinia and they moved and they found fortune elsewhere. So the pecorino romano is quite salty. There are two aging. The first one is I think 1 month, if I'm not mistaken, and then it can be up to 6 months, and then past that. Mostly of what we get here is considered for grating, right? Mostly for grating. So we get one that is like more on the aged side, saltier. You grate it on top of pasta. I use it for fillings quite a bit. In Italy, you find some pecorino romano, which is like so sweet and creamy, is actually great for eating, but it doesn't make it to the States, honestly, because there are so many other pecorino that it hasn't really found the market. So I keep them both because parmigiano is really a big cooking thing. It's not just what you put on pasta, but it's, as you know, a pretty cornerstone ingredient of Italian cuisine. And pecorino I keep because to me it's also an ingredient, because I'm from Umbria, and so we have a lot of pecorino going on there. And because sometimes if I want that extra kick on my pasta, that's what I use. I find pecorino goes well, for example, with pastas with just vegetables. I love pasta with like zucchini, very simple. Like I put the pasta and the vegetables in the same pot. I cook them and then I saute them with a little olive oil, and then I put pecorino. And it's, much more of just a spurt of flavor than I would otherwise get with Parmigiano. Parmigiano, I usually keep one that's a little creamier, so like a 16 to 24. And then I have also my 36 and up so that I can have that for eating. And also I have my kid is now almost 20 years old, and Parmigiano is like its own food group for him, and he's in college now. So my Parmigiano budget has like plummeted since he's been along. Because he was like, he would come home and then he would just like open it.
Because it's also an energetic snack.
Yes.
So it's at hand. It's like,
we give it it's first food. I mean, it's one of the first foods that you give for weaning is Parmigiano for kids, right? Yeah.
So yes, so just going back to the naming convention, the Pecorino Romano is not necessarily from the Rome. It was actually going back to probably the Roman Empire, but then a lot of these caseari, they moved to the Sardinian region. So I think I was in Sardinia where they would say it's almost like a Pecorino Roma style, but it's not necessarily from Rome.
No, but so again, it's regulated, the consortium that we were talking about. So it does have a consortium that controls the production. And the consortium is the one that tells you where the pecorino can come from, right? So actually it can come from, of course, Lazio, but also Sardinia, Umbria, Toscana, Abruzzo, and Marche. So those are the areas that can make the pecorino romano.
So we're going to add also a factory tour. I was in Sardinia, so I've seen the production of some cheeses, but also if you go into the regions of the Parmigiano Reggiano production, it's very interesting because, again, also learning about the way that the animals are raised in a conscientious way, up to how to read all those dots and dates and everything on the wheel. And probably the biggest crave of a lot of restaurants is actually to cook pasta in a cheese wheel. So
it's a big thing right now.
Yes, it's the big so now we are still going to talk about cheese, and we can talk about something that's not really cheese, but it's taken for cheese.
Ricotta,
which is ricotta.
Yeah.
So ricotta, why cannot really be defined as a cheese?
So ricotta in its stage, the way that it's made in Italy. Ricotta is literally means cook twice, right? Because ricotta is a way that it's a way that people, it's a way with whey that
No
cheesemakers
way.
that cheesemaker used to waste, to keep waste at a minimum. So once you've made your cheese, you've got all this whey left back, which still has all these flakes kind of like going through it, right? That are left behind by the curd and by the cheese making. So what do cheesemakers do? They they heat this up to just enough that these flakes start congregating together, and that's ricotta.
Yeah.
So ricotta can be done with any type of milk after you've done your cheese making. So you have, you have ricotta di pecora, you have goat ricotta, sheep ricotta, cow, buffalo ricotta. So any type of milk that is used in cheese transformation can have ricotta made with it. Sometimes you also have the mixed milk, which means, you take like whey from more than one production. Because there are dairy that will make mixed cheeses that have some sheep and some cow, or some goat and some cow. Then these flakes, these things is picked up and it's put in these baskets of various size. You can have like a 5-pound basket, like you get for ricotta romana, or you can have like the tiny basket. And then it's left to dry. And sorry, not to dry, to drain a little bit. And that's ricotta. Yeah. Right? So it doesn't have any cream added. It doesn't have any extra cheese or extra rennet or anything. It just comes from that. Yeah. So ricotta is, I have the story that, is in my book, is that I had this boyfriend years and years ago. And I was like always like chasing ricotta, and having ricotta. And at that time, we're talking, I was like in my 20s. So I couldn't find the Italian made ricotta, which now you can find, especially on the East Coast. So I couldn't find it. So I always had like, the approximation of that I found in the States. And it wasn't really the flavor that I was looking for, especially if I just ate it by itself. But it was an approximation that kind of just told me, that just gave me a little shiver nonetheless. And he just never got it. It's like he got why I would cook with ricotta, but he wouldn't get why I would just like it so much. And then I brought him to Italy and I gave him ricotta. And he never said a bad word about ricotta again. So he didn't last, the boyfriend didn't last, but his ricotta
converted.
So, but yes, so the ricotta in Italy, as you know, it's funny because it's super, it is grainy, and when you cut into ricotta, and you get almost like the thing that looks like the side of a mountain that's been fracked. Have you ever seen that, where it just goes like that? But it is also very creamy when you put it in your mouth, right? And there's nothing like warm ricotta. Like ricotta that's just out of the whey is insanely delicious. Especially if you put like a little bit of just made oil in it, is incredible. So ricotta, when they take it out, it's literally like you see the smoke coming out. And I mean, it's really, it's amazing. And it is not technically defined as a cheese, but it's designed as a cheese. It's called a prodotto caseario, which means a dairy product, but not a formaggio, right?
Okay. Very nice. And also for anyone making a ricotta or cheese, keep that whey, because whey is great for your vegetable garden and also great for panificazione. So if you're making bread or also some other sweets, whey is something else worth keeping. So then let's move to mozzarella and burrata. Are all the mozzarella equal? And what was what was that thing that I believe two brothers did that brought to the creation of burrata?
Oh, burrata, yeah. So first of all, one thing about whey, which is it's also really good to cook pasta in. If you've ever cooked pasta in whey, it's amazing. And if anyone wants to know how to make really good ricotta at home, my friend and colleague Rosetta Costantino.
Yes, we have had her. She's fantastic.
Yes, she makes really nice ricotta. So she makes homemade ricotta, which is really delicious. So mozzarella, burrata, and what was the other one? Oh,
With
ricotta.
this,
Ricotta we spoke about. So
yeah,
mozzarella and
yeah.
burrata. So
Mhm.
mozzarella is one of like kind of those it's what we call a pooled cheese, right? A pooled mass cheese. So mozzarella goes through like several stages, right? First you get the curd, then you pull the curd and you cook it again because you want to make it soft. And then you start doing the cutting. In Italian, another word for tagliare, cutting, to cut, is mozzare, right? Hence mozzarella, because you just kind of cut it,
Choke
right?
it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
choke with your.
yes, you cut it and you choke it. So artisanally, it was made by hand. So you see people who are like, with their hand in the hot water and they're making the snakes first and then they're softening the snakes and then they just kind of like literally cinch it with their hands and you get the little kind of scar almost that's on top of the mozzarella ball. Um, and um, and it's, I just love mozzarella. So two main families of mozzarella are the buffalo and the fior di latte. So people will say, oh, it cannot be mozzarella unless it's buffalo, or it cannot be mozzarella unless it's cow's milk. That's a crock of rubbish. It's mozzarella. The cheese is mozzarella. And then you have mozzarella di bufala or you have mozzarella di mucca o di latte vaccino. And because they are now so very common, equally common, we like to use fior di latte for the to define the cow's milk mozzarella, and we call the other one bufala, right? Because it's just easier to distinguish them, but they're both mozzarella. When I was growing up, it was all fior di latte. Mozzarella di bufala was a rare delicacy that you bought from like the beautiful tiny little deli that was, every town in Italy had kind of like what we call a gastronomia that had the specialty things that a larger market could not afford to keep because they couldn't sell them fast enough. And that's where you got mozzarella di bufala, or you have friends who went down south or friends who were coming up from the south who would bring them to you. But you didn't find mozzarella di bufala at the supermarket. Nowadays, you go to the supermarket and you actually find probably more mozzarella di bufala in some places than regular mozzarella. The pricing is different. Generally, the buffalo is a little more expensive, but you can have incredible mozzarella fior di latte. And I will confess that to me, fior di latte is the go-to. That's what I like better.
Yeah.
Not to say I don't like buffalo mozzarella. Of course I do.
No, but you can go to Puglia and
Yeah.
have wonderful mozzarella stracciata also in Molise.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
just a different.
It's a different mouthfeel. It's a milkiness. And also if you have one of the beauty of the mozzarella di bufala is the crunch that you have, right? You have a skin and an inside that have very different texture. So you bite into the skin and there's almost like a bit of resistance. And then you have like the beautiful little squirt of milkiness inside your mouth. It has definitely, it's a little tangier than fior di latte. Fior di latte is definitely towards the sweet spectrum, whereas fior di latte is just all very even, and it's got the beautiful soft silky skin. But to me, like a good fior di latte is unbeatable. But that's what I grew up with. So there's probably also very much of that, right? It's always thinking that your mother's cooking is the best.
Yes,
Right?
exactly. Now
Exactly.
let's see if you have the same challenge. So when I go home, there is indeed the call to this little shop that brings the mozzarella di bufala on a daily basis. So my dad wants to put in the fridge, and we have put signs everywhere. It's like, do not put mozzarella di bufala on the fridge. First of all, it's not going to last that long to begin with.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the different the two different ways of preserving the fior di latte and those type of mozzarella and the mozzarella di bufala, because they do get a different treatment.
Yes. So first of all, mozzarella, it's not a long-lasting cheese. So don't stock up on mozzarella, right? Mozzarella, it's a fresh cheese. Even the ones that are, the most industrial productions might have maybe like 2 weeks worth of shelf life, but that's really pushing it. And once you open it, that changes. So the 2 weeks that you may have really refers to the whole confection, right? So you have it and it's in water and it's sealed. And if you keep it that way for 2 weeks and you eat it at the end of 2 weeks, it's still edible. But if you open it, you're giving it maybe like 3, 4, 5 days at the most. And during those 3, 4, 5 days, it is going to change. So let's talk about the mozzarella di bufala. First of all, if you tell anyone who makes mozzarella di bufala that your father puts it in the refrigerator, they're going to stop selling it to him.
They're not gonna sell it to us. They're gonna mozzare. They're gonna.
Yes. So you may have noticed, your listener may have noticed that when you buy mozzarella di bufala, you're always buying it in a lot of water, right? In a vat of water. And that is how you keep it. You keep it in that way, like in the vat of water. Do not get rid of the water, unless, of course, you're eating the mozzarella right away. And just keep it on your counter, freshest spot in your kitchen on the counter. If you have marble counters, that's great. I have marble counters, and that's great because it gives it even more coolness. And you just keep it there. I would say up to maybe about 4 or 5 days. It will change because it's still alive. That's the thing. There are still live things in mozzarella. So at the beginning, it's going to be, it has the milkiness, and the sweetness is more pronounced at the tang. And then as it ages, you have the inside starts separating from the skin even more, but the skin becomes a little softer, not as taut and as bitey as it was at the beginning. And the tang takes over, so to the point where it becomes almost a little acid, which is fine. I mean, I like it. The point where it's no good anymore is the point where you eat it and you feel like a little fizz on your tongue. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
When you get that, then you're done. You should not be eating it anymore.
But in between, where it's not bad yet, worst case scenario, if you see a little bit of changes, just kind of trying to use it for other purposes, so that maybe it might not be. It's still considered fresh, but when there is a difference between day 1 and day 3. So once you are at day 3, it's still good, it's still fresh, but then maybe pizza or something.
Yes, pizza or a tart, or you can do a filling. You can also. I like to make little pockets. You can just buy pre-made, like nice little pre-made dough. Here in San Francisco, you can buy. I'm sure in Pittsburgh as well, like nice pre-made pizza dough, puff pastry, whatever it is. I love like mozzarella and peppers, so sometimes I just take. It's in my book, but you just take some puff pastry that somebody else makes, not that you make, because that takes a really long time. And you put a little bit of mozzarella, a little bit of parmigiano, and then roasted pepper on top. If you have a lot of time, you can roast your own peppers, but honestly, you can get really good pre-roasted pepper that are conserved in water, and just put them on, put it in the oven with some oregano, and you're done, right? It's a 5-minute, like 10-minute active time, and about 35 in the oven, and you've got dinner, and your house smells amazing. There's also that.
Yeah. So
yeah,
yes, one of the recipes also that brought me back to childhood is mozzarella in carrozza.
Yes.
Mozzarella in a chariot, right?
Yes.
Which is a as you rightfully translated, crispy mozzarella sandwich, and that is something that both kids and grown-ups alike will like. I don't know about your time, because I can be with you forever. We have the meats and the fish. Do you have time, or do you want to choose?
Sure. So I want to talk. We can.
Oh, the burrata. Sorry.
The burrata. Yes.
Burrata, because
burrata is interesting. I think burrata. Let's think of burrata as like a new, the new kid on the block, right? So burrata has only been around since the beginning of the 20th century. Somewhere in the first couple of decades, there were these two brothers in Andria, outside of Bari, that they were delivering the milk to the cities. And so it happened that there was a huge snowstorm that hindered the deliverance and hindered the deliveries. And so they said, okay, we have all this milk that is going to go bad. What do we do with it? So they transform the milk, they make cream, and then they made all these mozzarella things, all the kind of like they made mozzarella, and then they had all this byproduct from the mozzarella making. So they took the byproduct, they shredded it, they packed it in milk, and then in order to keep it even longer, they packed it in a bowl of mozzarella. And they were inspired to do this by a cheese called, I think it's called burratico, but I have to look into that, which is made in Molise, which conserves butter inside a kind of like an aged scamorza.
Like okay, yeah,
Yeah.
because we used to get that from my family is originally from Puglia, and I clearly remember seeing almost like a bologna looking like, and inside there was
Yes, exactly.
una
Yeah.
noce
And
di burro.
yes. So that was their inspiration. Said, okay, that's a good way to conserve butter. Let's try this. And so, I don't know how successful they were, meaning that burrata is not something that will hold for a long, long time. It's again, it's something that will hold in its unopened confection for maybe you can even last for a couple of weeks, but once you open it, you have to eat it within a couple of days. But anyway, they were successful for sure commercially, because this thing like took off by like wildfire and became very, very popular. It also remains to be said that all these fresh cheeses like mozzarella, burrata especially, and stracciatella, which is even a further development of burrata, which is where you just have the inside and no mozzarella skin inside, around it, only made it to the big scene fairly recently, because they were really super local productions, because they are so fresh, and there wasn't enough conservation technology to be able to deliver them further away than just the few kilometers around the various places of production. So again, burrata, just like mozzarella di bufala, was something that you got from someone who traveled down there, or from your local super specialized market that would let you know, like you would know that this day, or they would call you in and say, oh, we got the burrata in. And so you went and you got it. Nowadays, you find burrata like at your local supermarket. Safeway carries burrata here in San Francisco. And so it really has enjoyed a crazy notoriety, even excessive in a way, because then what happens is that you spawn tons of imitations that are not that great. But you can find really good burrata that's imported directly from Puglia. The more serious importers will have it flown in once a week, and they will only work on pre-order. So they will say, you will tell them, okay, I want 5, and they will just sum up what they have and order just maybe like a couple extra, just so that they have them in stock. But generally, that's what you get. So they know that they get it fresh and they've already sold it, and it's not going to sit in their inventory.
So where are we going to move?
Salumi. Let's talk. I just want to say one thing about salumi, which is I want people to think of salumi not just about, like a cold cut that you slice and eat. And of course, they're great like that. But salumi also needs to be, unfortunately, consumed in moderation, because it's very high in salt, high in fat. And so you cannot have a salumi diet and be healthy. Let's put it that way. But what most people don't realize about salumi is that salumi is a fantastic ingredient, because you need very little to bring an incredible pop of flavor. I mean, let's take pancetta. Pancetta is the more common one. You make a sauce, a tomato sauce is delicious. You make a sauce where you have a tablespoon of pancetta, you bring it to the next level. So I use salumi as ingredients in very many different ways, not just pancetta, but also guanciale, which is the pork jowl, conserved in the same way. Prosciutto is a great cooking ingredient. Mortadella is a great cooking ingredient. Speck, which is a smoked and cured prosciutto. Nduja, which is the Calabrian super spicy spreadable sausage. So I want people to reframe this idea of salumi, and just kind of think of them as a great kind of one of like your hidden weapon in the cooking arsenal. And then let's talk about fish.
Yes, well, I think that would have been your chosen picture for the book cover, right?
That was my cover, yes. And my editor said, Viola, we love it, but yeah, my publisher said it's not. First of all, they're right. It really kind of takes away the kind of how much the book spans, because the book spans so much, and it's not only about anchovies. And secondly, apparently, if you fish put on your cover, you vastly reduce your audience in the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have lots of acciughe to talk about. We have also Linda's oil.
Oh,
But
Linda's oil. You
Linda,
just
but
gave me some.
tell us a little bit about the acciughe, where to find good acciughe, also in some other stores. It might not just be the
Yeah.
ones. So I'll give you the floor back.
So acciughe, first of all, there are two types of acciughe that you find, right? Anchovies can be packed in oil and can be packed in salt. The ones in salt need some work, meaning they're packed in salt. They're like the whole anchovy except for the head and the entrails. So you need to rinse them very well. You need to rinse the salt off. You need to take the bone out, and then you can move on to the next step. There are several next steps that can be done. One of them is the one that you were just showing, which I love. They're just marinated, little lemon, olive oil, some red onion, little mint. You can make it spicy or not spicy. Or you can have the ones in oil. The ones in oil, I like that. I prefer them packed in olive oil. Sometimes they're in sunflower oil. The reason why producers like sunflower oil is because it holds for a long time. It just holds it holds its properties better. So if you're making a dressing, if you are making, if you're cooking with them, making a sauce, I would say, go with the ones in oil instead of having to go with all the thing of changing the ones in salt. But if you are putting them on a salad, for example, or if you are marinating them, then definitely go with the ones in salt. Where do you buy them? Several places. Are they all the same? No, not all anchovies are all the same. In Italy, there are two places that are considered to make the best anchovies, which are the Ligurian coast and the Amalfi coast. So the ones from Amalfi are called from Cetara. And in Liguria, the area is Monterosso that has the most priced acciughe. Cetara is a bigger production. They just have more there. In Liguria, it's a tiny production, but if it's definitely worth every penny if you find them. And it's a lot of pennies, but they are worth it. And the Cetara ones you can find in the States in different places. My favorite place to buy them is a website called Gustiamo. They are based in the Bronx. So gustiamo.com, they're online, and you just go there and they have anchovies in salt, and they are incredibly delicious. Why are the ones in salt better? Well, first of all, because they choose the prime anchovies, right? They are whole and just barely clean. They look beautiful. So they're not going to take the skinny little anchovies. They're going to take the ones that are beautiful and plump. And also they maintain their properties better under salt than they do under oil. And then the other product that we should talk about is colatura. Which I love. So colatura is kind of like the anchovy drippings that are coming as the anchovy are being put under salt and fermenting to be then packed in jars and shipped off to the lucky people. So this colatura is from, one huge barrel of anchovies, you get like 100 milliliter of colatura. It's about a 6 months period. But just like balsamic, it's something that you just need a little dash of. And also it brings so much to any dish. You can use it in a dressing, you can sprinkle it over some vegetables, but you can also use it in a reduction. Those chicken breast cutlets that are in the anchovy chapter, those are one of the sleeper hit. Like people look at them and they're like, oh, chicken breast, because I don't really do chicken breast all that much. I kind of consider it hospital food, but in that incarnation, it really is worth your time. Yeah, so much with anchovies, right? I mean, you can cook, you can put them on a salad, you can put them on the bottom of a pasta, soffritto. You can make a roast with it. There's a bunch of ingredients that I use to make things better. So let's say I have something that's been cooking a long time, a slow roast something. And I go and I try the sauce and I'm like, this is nice, but there's something missing. I'll just mash up an anchovy and throw it in there. And I know it's going to fix it.
So another little thing, and I'll let you go, is botarga. That is, when I was in Sardinia, it was the botarga galore. A lot of people might not be too familiar with it, what it is. And it looks like a little heart when you cut it. And then after the botarga, I'm gonna let you go.
So botarga is, so this book mostly has ingredients that you can find fairly easily, and also at different price points, right? Because you can find conserved tomato at different price points, anchovies at different price points, even the cheeses. But botarga is probably one of the ingredients, I will admit, in this book that's a little bit more rarefied, and it does need a little bit of scouting for. You can find a lot of them online. I mean, even Amazon has a botarga store, so you can find it pretty easily online, but chances are you're not going to find it at your local market. What is it? So it's the raw sack of a fish, specifically mullet for the most part, other fish too, but mostly mullet, that is put in salt, and then it's either a solution or dry salt, and then it's pressed so it gets flat, and then it's hung to air dry. It comes to us probably from the Arab world. By now, it's produced all over the Mediterranean basin in different ways. But I would say that Italy is probably the country that's known the most for the production of botarga. It happens mostly in Sardinia, but there's also a place to a very small production in Orbetello, in the southern Tuscan coast, which is where I first came to know it. And you recognize it because it's shaped like a heart. You know, you hang it and it's like an upside down heart. It is, you know, what does it taste like? If you take the time to read my book, which I think you should, because I think it's lovely.
It is fascinating, the stories and everything in the book that it complements even more of the information that you have shared with us.
To me, I always say that having botarga is like having tea with a little mermaid in her cave. You know, it's really kind of like the quintessence of everything that you think about the sea. So it's both the salinity, but it's also the deep flavor of fish. That's a hint of citrusiness to it. So it's really wonderful. And I should say also the mullet botarga is my favorite because that's what I grew up with. But you can also make botarga from other fish, and especially in Sicily, there is a big production of tuna botarga. And tuna botarga, it's a sack. It's not tuna doesn't have a two-lobe sack. It only has like one sack. So it's kind of rectangular. And it is brinier and saltier because it stays under salt longer than mullet. But it's also quite good, and you know, great to shave on eggs, great to shave on pasta, on bitter greens. It's great with broccoli. It's great with artichokes, with potatoes. Great with the white meats, so pork tenderloin, chicken. So you can really kind of span with botarga, very, very far away.
Okay. Well, this conversation has been incredible, and unfortunately our time together is up. Il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning into the program. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. And again, I would like to thank my friend Viola Buitoni. Again, this is a different way of exploring Italy. Italy by Ingredient Artisanal Foods and Modern Recipes is definitely a must-have book and must-cook recipes. And this episode coincides with Women's Day. So in honor of all the women that will be also listening to the program, we are going to go back to where we started, was the balsamic vinegar. So you have a cocktail that is very simple to make. That includes that traditional balsamic we were talking about. Exactly. So maybe just a couple of drops. Then
then I add prosecco, so a couple of drops at the bottom of a flute. Then you put in a little bit of prosecco, kind of mix it gently so it doesn't bubble over, and then you fill it with prosecco again. This one, I talk about it with a little squeezed strawberries in it because the strawberry juice brings in a nice kick of sugar. But you can also use other fruit. You can use any type of berry. I like to make it with pomegranates during the holiday season. It looks beautiful.
Exactly.
And I know that you're having the cocktail. I'm actually toasting you with coffee because it's too early for cocktails where I am in San Francisco.
It's somewhere, noon. I will be making. I brought the crema cotta, and I forgot the aceto balsamico tradizionale. I have my little reduction, but it won't do the same thing. So I
Won't do
want
the
to give
same
it
thing.
justice. But Viola, sei stata fantastica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's keep
And
in touch. And next time you come
we
back in
will.
Pittsburgh, let me know.
And may I make a toast also to all the women who read me and to all the women from whom I've learned. You'll find stories of them throughout the book, but also to the two wonderful women who were kind enough to endorse my book on the back of my cover, who are Ruth Raicho and Lydia Bastianic, who are two giants on whose shoulders I humbly stand on. And thank you so much, if they listen, for doing this for me, because it really was an amazing recognition of the work I've been doing for so long. So thank you. And thanks to you, Viviana.
Alla prossima. I can't wait. I feel that we're friends. I hope that our
Yes.
paths will put us in the same
Yes.
place at some point in the near future. Ok,
Thank you.
arrivederci a tutti quanti. Ciao ciao.
Arrivederci. Ciao ciao.